Get out. Emma Callahan's voice didn't shake. Her hands didn't tremble. She looked straight at the most dangerous man in Boston and said it again, steady, cold, final. Get out of this restaurant, right now. Adrian Valenti didn't move. He stood at the edge of her table, suit jacket, unbuttoned, dark eyes fixed on her like she was the only person in the room. Like Daniel didn't exist. Like 3 years of silence meant nothing. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. If you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The restaurant was called Lena's. It was the kind of place that didn't try too hard. Checkered tablecloths, candlelight that actually flickered, a jazz record playing softly from somewhere behind the kitchen wall. Emma had chosen it specifically because it felt nothing like the world she used to live in. No marble floors. No men in black suits standing at every door. No sound of conversations that stopped the moment she entered a room. Just good food, dim light, and a man across from her who thought the most dangerous thing in Boston was a parking ticket. Daniel Parker was 41 years old. He taught AP history at a public high school in Cambridge. He coached junior varsity soccer on Wednesdays. He owned one nice blazer and wore it to every first date. Emma knew all of this because she had asked him directly 3 weeks ago when he had walked into the bookshop where she worked and spent 45 minutes deciding between 2 biographies of Abraham Lincoln before finally asking if she recommended either of them. She had recommended both. He had asked for her number. She had almost said no. She had almost said no because she knew even then that good things had a way of getting complicated around her. That peace was something she had built carefully, brick by brick, over 3 years. A quiet apartment in Beacon Hill, a job surrounded by books that asked nothing of her, a life that was small and safe and entirely her own. But she was 34 years old and tired of eating dinner alone. So she said yes, and tonight was their 4th date. And Daniel had brought her a single yellow tulip because he remembered she mentioned once that roses felt too formal. And he had made a reservation 6 days in advance, and he had arrived 8 minutes early. Emma had looked at him across the candlelight 20 minutes ago and thought quietly, carefully, maybe this is what normal feels like. She should have known better. She heard the door before she saw it open, not because it was loud, but because the room changed. The way a room changes when pressure drops before a storm, a collective stillness, a held breath, a dozen conversations tapering off mid-sentence without anyone knowing exactly why. Emma felt it in her spine first. Daniel looked up. Is something? Don't turn around, she said. But she already knew. She already knew before she saw the first man in black pass the hostess stand without stopping. Before the second one stationed himself near the emergency exit. Before the third moved to the bar, and the bartender took 2 steps back without being asked. She knew because her body remembered what her mind had spent 3 years trying to forget. The pattern. The positioning. The specific, deliberate choreography of men who moved like chess pieces on a board that only one person controlled. And then the door opened wider, and Adrian Valenti walked in. He hadn't changed. That was the first thing she noticed, and immediately resented. 3 years. 3 years of her life rebuilding herself from the ground up, and he walked in looking like time was something that happened to other people. Same jaw. Same shoulders. Same way of moving through a space like the space had been designed specifically to receive him. He was wearing charcoal gray tonight. No tie. The top button of his shirt undone. His dark hair was slightly shorter than she remembered, but the eyes were exactly the same. The color of deep water. The kind that looked calm until you were already under. He saw her the moment he entered. She watched his gaze move across the room and land on her like it had never had to search at all. Like he already knew exactly where she was sitting, because he did something cold whispered at the back of her mind. He always knows. Daniel turned around despite her warning. She watched his face cycle through confusion, then discomfort, then a low-grade alarm that he didn't fully understand, but clearly felt. Emma, do you know those men? Daniel. She kept her voice even. I need you to take your jacket, put it over your arm, and walk to the restroom. Don't rush. Don't look back. Wait for me there. What? Why, what's going on? Please. She touched his hand briefly. I'll explain everything. I just need you to go, right now. He was a good man. She could see him wanting to argue, wanting to be the kind of person who stayed and handled things. She watched him swallow that instinct down. 5 minutes, he said. If you're not there in 5 minutes, I'll be there. He stood. He picked up his jacket. He walked toward the back of the restaurant with the careful steadiness of a man trying very hard not to appear afraid. Emma watched him go. Then she picked up her wine glass, took a single slow sip, set it back down with a soft click against the tablecloth, and looked up at Adrian Valenti, who had stopped 3 feet from her table. You've got 30 seconds, she said. Talk fast. He looked at the chair Daniel had just vacated. May I? No. He sat down anyway. She had expected that too. You look well, he said. Adrian. Your hair is different. Adrian. Shorter in the back. It suits you. If you came here to talk about my hair, she said, you wasted a trip. Go home. He rested one arm on the table. The gesture was casual. She knew it wasn't. She knew every gesture he made was calculated 3 steps ahead, the way everything about Adrian Valenti was layered, deliberate, never wasted. I came here, he said, because I need to speak with you. You need to speak with me. Emma set her hands flat on the table. You have my phone number. You have my email. You have apparently my home address and my work schedule, and God knows what else. You could have called. You could have sent a letter. You could have done literally anything other than walk into the restaurant where I'm on a date with someone who has absolutely nothing to do with your world and surround the building with... She counted quietly in her head. 6 men. 8, he said. Excuse me. There are 8 men. 2 are outside. She stared at him. I wasn't trying to frighten you, he said. You never are. That's the problem. Something moved across his face. Not quite guilt. Something adjacent to it and harder to name. Emma. He leaned forward slightly. I need your help. No. You haven't heard. No. She picked up her purse from the back of the chair. Whatever it is, whatever is happening, the answer is no. That world is not my world anymore, Adrian. I left. I built something here. Something small and quiet and mine. And you don't get to walk into the middle of it with 8 men and... Victor Moretti knows you exist. She stopped. Her hands went still on the strap of her purse. The candlelight kept flickering. The jazz kept playing. Somewhere across the restaurant, a woman laughed at something her companion said, light and bright and utterly ordinary. What did you say? Emma's voice came out quieter than she intended. Victor Moretti. Adrian's voice was low, even, like he was reading from a document. Head of the Moretti family. Eastern Territory. Currently moving on 3 of our distribution corridors and making alliances with 2 families that were neutral this time last year. He paused. He found out about you 4 days ago. I'm not certain how. I have people looking into it. Emma set her purse back down slowly. He knows what you did for us, Adrian continued. He knows what you know. He's not going to... He stopped himself. Chose different words. He sees you as leverage. I left, she said. I left 3 years ago. I'm not part of this. Emma. I am not part of this. I know you're not. His voice was steady. That's why I'm here. Because you're not part of it, and someone is going to come for you anyway, and I... Again the pause. Something brief but visible moving through his expression. I'm not going to let that happen. She looked at him for a long moment. She had spent 3 years learning not to look at him. Learning to fill the space his absence left with other things, books, routines, the comfortable smallness of a life she had chosen for herself. She had been good at it. Mostly good. The way you are good at not touching a bruise until you forget it's there, and then someone presses exactly that spot. What does Victor knowing about me have to do with you sitting in my date's chair in the middle of my Friday night? She asked. Adrian was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. I told the council I was getting married, he said. Emma blinked. The council made a demand, he continued, as if he were simply relaying information, as if he were reading minutes from a meeting she'd missed. My father's death destabilized certain agreements. There are 3 families that were loyal to him personally, rather than to the organization. To keep them in line to prevent the kind of conflict that would cost a great deal more than money, they want a political marriage. An alliance by blood. They want me to take a wife from one of the opposing families. Okay, Emma said carefully. So do that. Marry whoever they picked. What does that have to do with... I'm not doing that, he said. Adrian. I told them I was already promised to someone. He met her eyes. I told them I was engaged. The candlelight flickered. I see, Emma said. I named you. Of course you did. Emma, of course you did. She laughed. It came out brittle and sharp the way laughter does when it's made of something other than amusement. Because why would you ask? Why would you call or write or walk up to me like a normal human being and say, Emma, I have a situation, would you be willing to help me? Why would you do any of that when you could just walk into a restaurant, sit down uninvited, and tell me what's already been decided? I'm asking now. You're telling me now. There's a difference. She leaned forward. You didn't come here to ask me. You came here to inform me. Those are very different things and you know it. He held her gaze. He didn't look away. He never looked away. That was one of the things about Adrian Valenti that the people who feared him never fully understood. It wasn't the men or the money or the reach of the organization his father had built and he had inherited. It was this. The absolute unblinking steadiness of someone who had decided something and seen no reason yet to undecide it. I'm asking, he said again quietly. Emma, I'm asking. She studied his face. For how long? She said finally. Something in his shoulders eased slightly, almost imperceptibly. 6 months. Long enough to neutralize the pressure from the council. Long enough to restructure the alliances without... 6 months, she repeated. And what exactly does 6 months look like? Because if you're about to tell me I need to move into the Valenti house... I am. No. The alternative is... No, Adrian. She stood up from the table. She was surprised to find that her legs were steady. Her hands were steady. The thing in her chest that felt like panic had somewhere turned into something colder and more useful. Anger, maybe, or something that lived just past the border of it. The alternative is that I go get Daniel from the bathroom, I apologize to him, and I go home. You go back to your council and your men and your territory wars, and you figure out your own problems. Because they are your problems. Victor already sent someone to watch your apartment. She sat back down. Not dramatically. Just sat. Like the information had made it briefly necessary. When, she said. 3 days ago. We intercepted him before he got close. But Emma. He leaned forward, and for the first time that evening, she saw something in his face that wasn't calculated. Something that moved underneath the control, like water under ice. They're not going to stop. They know you exist now. They know what you know. And as long as you're out here living your life without any protection, you are vulnerable, she said quietly. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. The jazz shifted. Something slower now, something with a muted trumpet and long spaces between the notes. You knew, she said. You've known where I was, this whole time. He didn't deny it. 3 years, she said. You knew where I worked, where I lived. You knew I was here tonight. Yes. And in 3 years you never... She stopped, started again. Why didn't you reach out? I was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was different, still controlled, but stripped of something. Because you left for a reason, and I had enough respect for that reason to stay away. Emma looked at him. Even though, she said slowly, you were keeping tabs on me. I wasn't surveilling you. I was... He exhaled. It was the first unguarded thing she'd seen him do all evening. I needed to know you were safe. There's a difference. You keep saying there's a difference, she said. Between asking and telling. Between watching and surveilling. You're very interested in the distinctions, Adrian. Because they matter. They matter to you. Yes, he said plainly. They do. She looked down at the tablecloth, at the candle between them, at the wine glass with her lipstick on the rim. She thought about her apartment, the small clean rooms she had arranged exactly the way she wanted them, the bookshop where she knew every customer by name and every title by heart, the life she had assembled from the pieces of a person she'd decided to become. She thought about Victor Moretti. She had heard the name before. Not in passing, in the way you hear a name that appears in documents at odd intervals, that appears on wire transfers, that don't quite add up, that appears connected to things that should not be connected. She had noted it 3 years ago, filed it away in the part of her mind that was very good at filing things away. "If I come back," she said. The words felt strange in her mouth, foreign and familiar at the same time, like a language she'd once spoken fluently and hadn't used in years. "If I agree to this, it is 6 months. Exactly 6 months. I'm not staff. I'm not an employee. I am not at anyone's disposal. I retain the right to leave at any point if I believe my safety is being compromised." "Agreed. I want that in writing." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and set a folded document on the table between them. She stared at it. "You had that ready," she said. "I was hopeful," he said. She looked up at him. Something crossed her face that she couldn't entirely control, some blend of disbelief and reluctant involuntary recognition of the fact that he was still, despite everything, despite 3 years and every careful wall she'd built, exactly who he'd always been. "You're unbelievable," she said. "So I've been told." She picked up the document. She didn't open it. "I need to go speak to Dan." Adrian said nothing. "I need to explain to a genuinely decent man that our 4th date is probably our last, and that it's not his fault, and that I'm sorry." She folded the document and put it in her purse. "You will wait here. You will tell your men outside to move back. You will not speak to Daniel, look at Daniel, or in any way make Daniel feel like his life is in danger. He's not in danger. He doesn't know that." She pushed her chair back. "He's a high school history teacher, Adrian. He coaches soccer. Give him that at least." She stood. She walked to the back of the restaurant. Her heels made soft sounds against the floor. She kept her spine straight. She kept her face calm. It was only when she pushed through the door into the short hallway near the bathrooms, only when she saw Daniel standing there with his jacket still folded over his arm, and his face full of the confused concern of someone trying very hard to be steady for someone else. It was only then that she felt the weight of what was happening settle across her shoulders like something physical. "Hey," he said. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," she said. And she meant it even though she also knew what she was about to say. "Daniel, I'm so sorry." He looked at her carefully. "Who is he?" "Someone from my past. Someone I owe." She stopped, started again. "It's complicated. I can't explain all of it right now. But I have to go with him tonight and I—" She saw his face change. "Not like that. It's not like that. It's a situation, a problem, something I need to handle." "Is it safe?" The question landed quietly between them. She thought about the right answer. "It's safer than the alternative," she said. "I'm sorry, Daniel. Genuinely. You didn't deserve any of this tonight." He was quiet for a moment. She watched him deciding whether to push further, whether to argue, whether to do the thing men sometimes did, where concern became insistence. He didn't. "Okay," he said. He nodded once slowly. "Okay." He reached out and briefly gently pressed her hand. "Take care of yourself." She squeezed his hand once, then she let go. She walked back out. Adrian was still at the table exactly where she'd left him. His hands were flat on the tablecloth. He was looking at nothing in particular. But she knew she had always known, even when she wished she didn't, that he was aware of every single thing happening in that room. He looked up when she appeared. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. "Your men outside," she said quietly. "Did any of them follow Daniel here? Were they watching him before tonight?" "No," Adrian said. "He wasn't a priority." "Good." She slipped her coat on. "Then he stays out of this, completely. He doesn't know anything, and he won't." "Agreed." She looked at him. "I haven't signed anything yet," she said. "I know. I'm going to read every word of that document before I sign it." I'd be disappointed if you didn't. She picked up her purse. And Adrian. She said his name like a period at the end of a sentence. Like punctuation. Like something final. He looked at her. If you lie to me once, she said. Once. About anything. About Victor. About the council. About what you need from me or why I leave. No document. No 6 months. No second conversation. I walk out and you don't find me again. Understand? He held her gaze. I understand, he said. She nodded. She walked toward the door. He stood and fell into step beside her. Not behind her, not ahead of her, but beside. And she told herself that was just geography, just the layout of the space, just the width of the aisle between the tables. The door opened. Cold air hit her face. Somewhere in the dark, she knew 8 men were watching. She kept walking, because there was a man named Victor Moretti who already knew her name and a world she had never entirely left, and a woman she used to be who had survived worse than this. And because Emma Callahan had spent 3 years being afraid of the past, she was done being afraid. The car ride was 23 minutes. Emma knew because she counted. Not the seconds she wasn't that far gone, but the turns. Left on Commonwealth. Right on Tremont. The long stretch of Storrow Drive, with the river invisible in the dark beside them. She counted the turns the way she used to count breaths during the years she worked for the Valenti family, when counting was the only thing that kept the edges of her thinking clean. Adrian sat on the opposite side of the back seat. Not close. There was a full cushion of space between them which she appreciated and suspected was deliberate. One of his men drove. Another sat in the passenger seat. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them looked back. Outside, Boston moved past in amber and white. "You're counting the turns," Adrian said. She didn't look at him. "I'm not. You always count when you're nervous. You did it in every meeting where my father raised his voice. You'd tap your fingers in sequence on whatever surface was closest, thumb to pinky, over and over." She pressed her hand flat against her thigh. "I'm not nervous," she said. "I'm angry. There's a difference. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did you read the document?" "Half of it. In the restaurant while you were pretending not to watch me." "I wasn't pretending." "I know." She finally turned to look at him. "Clause 7. Explain Clause 7. Something crossed his face. Almost a smile. "You got to Clause 7 in the restaurant." "I read fast. Explain it." He shifted slightly to face her. "It's a protection clause. It specifies that your financial accounts, your apartment lease, your employment at the bookshop, none of it gets touched. Not by me. Not by anyone associated with the family. Whatever arrangement we have, your existing life remains intact." "It says, remains accessible," she said. "Not intact. Accessible implies I'm not living it. For 6 months you won't be, primarily. And after 6 months, it is all exactly as you left it. The apartment, the job, all of it." She looked at him steadily. "You've already spoken to my landlord." He didn't deny it. "Adrian." "I spoke to him 3 months ago," he said. "When the situation with the council first began developing. I secured the lease through the end of the year as a precautionary." "You secured my lease." Her voice was flat. "Without telling me. Without alarming you. That's not your decision to make." "No," he said. "It wasn't. I know that." The admission came out clean, without the defensive edge she'd expected. That surprised her. The Adrian she remembered had never been particularly comfortable admitting to being wrong, not because he was arrogant exactly, but because the concept of operating without full information was so foreign to him that errors barely registered as such. He planned too far ahead for mistakes to feel like mistakes. They always turned out to be steps in something larger. "I overstepped," he said. "It won't be the last time I do. I'm telling you that up front." She stared at him. "You're telling me up front that you'll overstep," she repeated. "I'd rather you expect it than be blindsided by it." "That might be the most honest thing you've ever said to me." "I've always been honest with you." "You've been selective," she said. "That's different." He accepted that without argument. which was again not what she'd expected. The car took a long right, and Emma recognized the neighborhood before she could stop herself. The wider streets, the older buildings, the particular quality of the dark between the streetlights that she associated with money that had been in the same hands for a very long time. Her stomach tightened. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And I need you to answer it without calculating what version of the truth is most useful to you. Ask. How did Victor Moretti find out about me?" The silence lasted exactly long enough to tell her it wasn't a simple answer. "We don't know yet," Adrian said. "But you have a theory." Another pause. "We have a suspicion. Someone inside passed information. Someone who had access to records from before you left." Emma went very still. "How many people knew what I did for the family?" she asked. "In full 4. My father, Marco, Lucia, and me." "Marco is in Italy." "Yes." "Lucia is—" She stopped. "Lucia wouldn't." "No," he said. "She wouldn't." "Then it's someone who found the records, someone who went looking." "Yes, that's our working assumption." "Who has access to those records now?" "That's what I'm trying to determine." She looked at her hands. The car was slowing now, navigating a gate she remembered. Black ironstone pillars, a driveway lined with old oaks whose branches she'd watched change through 4 seasons the last time she lived within these walls. "Adrian." She said his name quietly. Not as punctuation this time, as a question. He looked at her. "Is it possible," she said carefully, "that someone inside the council is feeding information to Moretti?" His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly, but she was watching for it. "Yes," he said. She nodded, filed it. The car stopped. She sat for a moment without moving, looking at the house through the window. The tall front, the lit windows, the 2 men at the entrance who stood exactly the same way the men at the restaurant had stood, and the men she assumed were stationed at every access point she couldn't see. "Same room?" she asked. "I had the east wing prepared, private entrance from the garden. You'll have your own—" "Same room," she said. "The one I used before." He looked at her. "That's the family floor. I know where it is." "Emma." "If I'm supposed to be your fiancé," she said, "I imagine the council will want evidence of that. Evidence means proximity. Proximity means I shouldn't be in the guest wing." She picked up her purse. "Same room, and I want the connecting door locked from my side." He held her gaze for a moment. "All right," he said. She got out of the car. The air was colder than it had been in the restaurant. She pulled her coat tighter and walked toward the entrance without waiting. She heard his footsteps behind her, steady, unhurried, the same deliberate pace she remembered, and told herself the fact that she recognized his footsteps was just memory. Just muscle memory. Nothing more significant than that. The 2 men at the door stepped aside. She walked through without making eye contact with either of them. Inside the house was exactly as she remembered it, and completely different. The bones were the same, the entrance hall, the curved staircase, the oil paintings that had been in the Valenti family for 3 generations. But the feeling was different. Quieter in some ways. Heavier in others. The specific texture of a house that had recently lost its patriarch and was still figuring out what it was now. She stopped at the foot of the stairs. A woman was coming down them. Late 50s dark hair shot through with silver, wearing a silk blouse, and the expression of someone who had been briefed and was processing her feelings about the briefing in real time. "Lucia," Emma said. "Emma Callahan." Lucia Valenti stopped 3 steps from the bottom and looked at her. Not with hostility. With something more complicated than that. "You look exactly the same." "You look better," Emma said honestly. Something softened in Lucia's face. 3 years, she said. "You couldn't pick up the phone." Emma faltered slightly. "I thought it was cleaner." "Cleaner." Lucia said the word like she was examining it. Then she came down the last 3 steps, crossed the hall, and pulled Emma into a firm, brief embrace that lasted exactly long enough to communicate something that neither of them put into words. When she stepped back, her eyes were dry but close. You've seen the document? Lucia asked. I have it. The council meets Thursday. Lucia shot a look past Emma at Adrian, who had stopped in the doorway. Something passed between them, sibling communication dense and fast and entirely opaque to Emma. Then Lucia looked back at her. You should know what you're walking into. She will, Adrian said. She should hear it from me, Lucia said. Emma looked between them. Someone tell me. Lucia took a breath. When our father died, he left Adrian with the title and the territory and the debt of loyalty from a dozen men who are not naturally loyal to Adrian. They were loyal to a style of leadership that our father embodied, brutal, direct, absolute. Adrian has never led that way. She said it matter-of-factly without criticism. The council sees that as weakness. 3 families are testing the edges right now. Victor Moretti is the most aggressive, but he's not the only problem. Who else? Emma asked. Sal Carvana. He controls the southern corridor. He's been quiet, but the kind of quiet that means he's listening very carefully to whoever talks loudest. And if Victor talks loudest, Carvana follows. And if Carvana follows, 2 other families follow Carvana. Lucia folded her hands. A marriage to an outside family breaks the pattern. It says Adrian is building something new. It signals stability. It signals confidence. It changes the conversation. Or, Emma said, it signals that Adrian couldn't manage the council's preferred arrangement and had to improvise. Lucia blinked, then looked at Adrian. I like her. She's always been this direct, Adrian said. I know, that's why I like her. Lucia turned back to Emma. You're right, that is a risk. Which is why the presentation of this matters. You cannot appear to be a solution. You have to appear to be the plan that was always in place. He named me in front of the council before telling me, Emma said. How do we manage the timeline on that? Adrian and Lucia exchanged another look. We don't have to manage it extensively, Adrian said. The council doesn't know exactly when I told you, only that you're here now. That's what matters. So we start from tonight, Emma said. Tonight is when I came back. Yes, she thought about it, turned the variables over. The way she used to turn numbers over looking for the weight of them, the thing they balanced against. Fine, she said. But I need to know everything. The council's full composition. Who is genuinely loyal to Adrian, who is waiting to see which way the wind blows, and who is already in Moretti's pocket. I need names, financials, and a timeline of everything that's happened since your father died. Lucia looked at Adrian. I told you, he said quietly. You told me a lot of things, Lucia said. You didn't tell me she'd walk in here ready to work. She was always ready to work, he said. That was never the question. Emma looked at him. What was this question? He held her gaze. Whether you'd come back. She looked away first. She didn't examine why. Show me the financials, she said. And get someone to bring my things from the apartment. I need my laptop and the gray cardigan on the back of my bedroom chair and... She paused, aware of how specific she was being, aware that it revealed something about how quickly she was adjusting. She finished the sentence anyway. The blue notebook on my desk. The one with the coffee ring on the cover. Don't send anyone who'll go through my drawers. I'll go myself, Lucia said. Emma looked at her gratefully. Thank you. Lucia nodded, once turned and walked back toward the staircase, with the kind of decisive stride that made it clear the conversation was over and the work had begun. Emma stood in the entrance hall. Adrian was still near the door. You should eat something, he said. You didn't finish dinner. I wasn't hungry then. Are you now? She was, actually. She hadn't eaten since noon. Don't make it into something, she said. I'm not. I'm asking if you want food. Yes, she said. And coffee. Real coffee, not whatever powdered thing Marco used to stock in the kitchen. Marco's been gone 2 years. The coffee is better now. Good. She started toward the kitchen. Emma. She stopped but didn't turn. Thank you, he said, for coming. She stood still for a moment, weighing whether to say what was on her mind, deciding the directness had served her well so far. I didn't come for you, she said. I came because Victor Moretti knows my name, and being inside these walls is safer than being outside them. She paused. Don't confuse gratitude with choice. She kept walking. She heard nothing behind her, which was somehow worse than an argument. The kitchen was warm and large and smelled faintly of garlic and rosemary, and Emma stood at the counter eating leftover pasta from a bowl she served herself, while a man named Gio, who had been with the Valenti family since before she arrived, and who greeted her with the particular warmth of someone who had been told to be welcoming, but actually meant it made coffee in a machine that looked like it cost more than her monthly rent. She ate standing up. She didn't want to sit. Sitting felt too settled, too comfortable, too much like a person who had arrived somewhere they intended to stay. She was not that person. She was a person who had made a calculation. She reminded herself of this between bites. Gio set the coffee beside her without comment. She wrapped both hands around the mug and let the heat move through her palms and thought about Victor Moretti. About the specific way Adrian's jaw had tightened when she asked about the council leak. About Clause 7 in the document which protected her life, but described it as accessible rather than inhabited a distinction that someone had chosen very deliberately. She thought about what Lucia had said. You cannot appear to be a solution. You have to appear to be the plan that was always in place. She thought about the fact that Adrian had told the council he was engaged before he came to see her. That he had walked into that restaurant with 8 men and a signed document and the specific settled confidence of someone who had already run the odds and determined she would say yes. She thought about how much that should bother her. She thought about how much it did. Excuse me? She looked up. A man she didn't recognize was standing in the kitchen doorway. Mid-30s. Dark hair, sharp features, the particular build of someone who had spent a lot of time being useful in physical situations. He was wearing a jacket that was slightly too structured to be casual and looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize. You're Emma Callahan, he said. Not a question. I am, she said. And you're Dante Ricci. He crossed to the opposite counter and poured himself water from the tap like he owned the room. I run security. What happened to Fabrizio? Something shifted in his expression, briefly. He retired. She looked at him steadily. The word retired in this world had several meanings. I see. Adrian said you'd need a security detail. I don't need a security detail. He said you'd say that. Then he should also have told you that I mean it. Dante looked at her with the same flat evaluation she'd seen in a dozen men over the years. The look that said, you're an unknown quantity, and I haven't decided yet what kind of problem you are. She had learned a long time ago not to be bothered by that look. Unknown quantities had their advantages. Moretti's people made contact with one of our street-level distributors this afternoon, he said. He was asked about a woman named Emma who used to work for the family. She set her coffee mug down. What did he say? She asked. He said he didn't know anyone by that name. Then he called us. Dante watched her absorb this. Moretti is already asking questions. He's going to start pushing harder when he finds out you're back inside. Then I suggest, she said carefully, that how he finds out and what he finds out matters a great deal. Dante studied her for a moment. Adrian said you were smart, he said. Adrian says a lot of things. He also said you'd be the most useful person in this building within 48 hours of walking through the door. Dante refilled his water glass. I told him that was optimistic. It is, she said. It'll take me 72. He almost smiled. Almost. I'll have someone outside your room tonight, he said. That's unnecessary. It's non-negotiable. She picked her coffee back up. Then at least make sure it's someone who doesn't pace. I can hear pacing through walls. He looked at her one more moment, then turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word. She finished her coffee. She set the bowl in the sink. She stood for a moment in the warm kitchen of the Valenti house, in the life she'd spent 3 years building a careful distance from, and breathed. Then she went upstairs. The room was the same. Different bedding. New curtains, a lamp she didn't recognize, but the same dimensions, the same window that looked out over the garden, the same connecting door to the room adjacent. She crossed to it immediately and checked. The lock was on her side exactly as Adrian had promised. She locked it. She sat on the edge of the bed. She pulled the document from her purse and read it in full. This time, every clause, every subclause, every carefully worded protection, and its equally careful caveat. It was good. Whoever had drafted it, and she had a feeling it hadn't been a lawyer, at least, not only a lawyer, had been thorough. She read Clause 12 twice. Clause 12 specified that in the event of a threat to her safety that could not be managed within the terms of the agreement, Adrian retained the right to act unilaterally to protect her, including actions that might extend the terms of the arrangement. She took out a pen. She crossed out unilaterally and wrote with her knowledge and consent in the margin. She initialed the change. She found 3 other clauses with similar structures, places where his authority over her circumstances was written as absolute rather than consultative, and she amended each one. Small changes. Precise changes. The kind of changes that only someone who had spent years reading this type of document would know to make. Then she signed it. She set it on the nightstand. She lay back on the bed, still in her coat, staring at the ceiling. Victor Moretti knew her name. Someone inside the organization had given it to him. Adrian had named her as his fiancée to a council that included men who might already be compromised, and she had walked back in. She thought about Daniel Parker standing in that hallway with his jacket over his arm, trying to be steady for someone who was about to disappear from his life. She thought about the bookshop, the smell of old paper and wood polish, the sound of the bell above the door. She thought about her apartment, the small rooms she had arranged exactly, so the coffee she made each morning and the French press she'd chosen, with the specific care of someone who had decided that small pleasures deserved to be done well. She thought about the word accessible. She was still thinking about it when a sound came through the wall. Not pacing, something quieter. A chair being pulled out. Papers being moved. The muted percussion of someone working late in the room next door. She lay there listening to it. Adrian working, just on the other side of the locked door. She thought about what he'd said in the car. "I needed to know you were safe." The flat admission of it, without decoration, without the softening language she'd expected. She thought about what he hadn't said, and that was the thing she realized that was always the hardest part with Adrian Valenti. Not what he said, not even what he did, but the spaces between the things he held back. The things he kept exactly close enough that you knew they existed, but not close enough to read them clearly. She had spent 3 years putting distance between herself and that particular form of frustration. She was back in the room next to it. She sat up. She took off her coat. She hung it on the back of the chair. She opened the document one more time and looked at her own amendments, her own initials in the margins, and thought about the fact that she had walked back into this willingly, calculation or not. Then she thought about Victor Moretti, and the man who had been sent to watch her apartment 3 days ago. And the question that had been sitting quietly at the back of her mind since the car ride, the one she hadn't asked yet because asking it changed things. She had found anomalies before. In numbers. In records. In the invisible architecture of money moving between hands that didn't want to be seen moving it. She had found them once with the Valenti family's own books years ago, and she had flagged them quietly and gone home, and decided she'd said enough because some information was the kind that cost you simply for possessing it. But Moretti didn't know that. Moretti thought she knew everything, which meant whatever he was protecting, whatever was buried in the financial structure of his operation that he didn't want the Valenti family to see, he thought Emma Callahan could find it. She reached for her phone and sent a single text to Lucia. "Can you get me access to the Valenti financial records from the last 3 years, all of them? Starting with everything that touched the council agreements." The response came back in under 2 minutes. "Already on it. Also, your notebook is on its way. I found a second one in your desk that looked important. Bringing both." Emma set the phone down. She lay back. This time she didn't think about the bookshop. She thought about numbers, about patterns, about the specific shape of a lie buried inside clean accounting. The way it always left a trace if you knew what you were looking for. She was already looking. She found the first anomaly at 2:47 in the morning. Not in the Valenti records, in Moretti's. She hadn't planned to look at Moretti's financials. Technically, she didn't have access to Moretti's financials. What she had was 3 years of council meeting summaries that Lucia had quietly extracted from her father's private files and buried inside the appendices of a budget reconciliation. From 14 months ago was a line item that didn't belong. A consulting fee. $11,000 paid quarterly to a firm called Aldgate Advisory Group. Emma knew that name. She sat up straighter. Aldgate Advisory Group had appeared in Valenti records twice years ago, under a different context entirely as a shell entity used to route payments for a real estate acquisition in Providence. She had flagged it at the time as structurally unusual, but not necessarily problematic. Standard enough construction for a family that needed to move money through clean-looking vehicles. But Aldgate appearing in Moretti's council submissions was not standard. It meant someone was using the same vehicle for both families, which meant either the same lawyer had set up both structures possible, not alarming, or someone with access to both families' financial architecture was deliberately connecting them in a way that neither family was meant to see. She wrote it down. Both notebooks now open on the bed, the newer one for current threads, the older one, her original, the one with the coffee ring, open to a page she hadn't looked at in 3 years. A page that contained in her own handwriting a series of numbers she had noted and never fully pursued. She looked at those old numbers now. Then she looked at the council summary. Then she said quietly to the empty room, "Oh, you clever, reckless, stupid man." She picked up her phone. It was nearly 3 in the morning. She stared at the screen for a long moment, thought about the locked door between her room and Adrian's, thought about the sound of him working late that had faded sometime around midnight. She called anyway. He picked up on the second ring. "Emma." His voice was alert, not groggy. He hadn't been sleeping either. "I need you in the study," she said. "Now. Bring whoever you trust most with the financial side of the operation." A pause. "It's 3 in the morning." "I know what time it is." Another pause, shorter. 10 minutes. She was already at the desk when he walked in. Dante 2 steps behind him, a man she recognized as Franco, the family's primary financial manager, mid-50s, meticulous a step behind that. All 3 of them looked like men who had been awake, which confirmed what she suspected: nobody in this house was sleeping well. "Sit down," she said. She didn't look up from the notebooks. "Franco, I need you to pull every transaction record you have connected to an entity called Aldgate Advisory Group. Any year, any amount. Don't filter anything out. I want raw data." Franco looked at Adrian. "Do it," Adrian said. Franco sat and opened his laptop. "What did you find?" Adrian asked. "Possibly nothing," Emma said. "Possibly everything." She turned the council summary to face him and pointed to the line item. "Aldgate shows up in Moretti's quarterly submission to the council 14 months ago. Does that name mean anything to you?" Adrian frowned at the page. "No, it means something to me." She opened the older notebook and found the page. Set it beside the summary. "I flagged this entity 3 years ago during the Providence acquisition. At the time, I wrote it off as a standard routing structure. But if the same entity is appearing in Moretti's paperwork, someone's bridging the 2 families financially," Dante said. He had been standing in the doorway. Now he moved closer and looked at the notebooks. "Without either family knowing." "That's the theory," Emma said. "I need the data before I'll call it a fact." Franco set his laptop on the desk and turned it to face them. 3 transactions connected to Aldgate. 2 from 4 years ago during the Providence period. And 1. He stopped. His face changed. 1 from 8 months ago, $60,000, coded as a legal retainer. The room went silent. 8 months ago was 3 months after the elder Valenti had died. Emma looked at Adrian. She watched the information land, watched it move through his expression with the specific controlled devastation of someone who was very practiced at not visibly falling apart. "That was after your father passed," she said quietly. Not to explain, just to make sure it was said plainly. "Yes," he said. "Who authorized it?" "I would have," he said. "Anything over 50,000 requires my signature." "Do you remember signing it?" His jaw was tight. I sign a great deal of documents. Adrian. She kept her voice steady. Do you remember signing it? He pulled out his phone, made a call, said 3 words, "Get me the ledger," and hung up. Then he looked at her. If I signed it, it'll be in the approval ledger. If it's not, then someone forged your signature, Emma finished. Or someone used your authorization code without your knowledge. Which means someone inside the house, Dante said. His voice had gone flat in a way that communicated very precisely how he felt about that possibility. Yes, Emma said. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Adrian said in the particular quiet of someone who has located the source of a problem and is now entirely focused on it. Keep going. What else? She almost told him to sleep. She looked at his face and decided against it. She kept going. By 5 in the morning, they had mapped 4 separate financial threads that connected in ways that ranged from subtle to nearly invisible to Aldgate Advisory Group. 2 of them were legitimate legacy structures from the Providence deal that had simply never been closed out. But the other 2 were different. One was the $60,000 payment from 8 months ago. The other was a series of small transfers, never more than $9,000 individually, just below the reporting threshold that had been made across a 14-month period to an account that Aldgate held at a private bank in Delaware. Total across 14 months, just under $110,000. Someone was being paid, Emma said. Slowly, carefully, in amounts designed not to attract attention. She sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment, assembling the shape of it. This isn't Moretti paying someone in the organization. Moretti doesn't have access to your internal accounts. This is someone inside your organization paying out through a vehicle that Moretti also uses. Which means they have a relationship with Moretti that predates the current conflict, Adrian said. This isn't an opportunistic betrayal. Someone has been working with him for over a year. At minimum, Emma said. Adrian stood up. She watched him cross to the window and stand there with his back to the room. The particular posture of someone who needed a moment that they were not going to take because taking it would mean admitting the moment was necessary. Adrian, Lucia said from the doorway. Emma hadn't heard her come in. Lucia was wearing a robe, her silver-streaked hair loose, and she was looking at her brother with the expression of someone who had suspected this and hoped to be wrong. How many people had access to the authorization codes? Emma asked. Lucia and Adrian exchanged a look. 6, Lucia said. Family members and the 2 senior managers. Franco. Emma looked at the financial manager. I have access to the codes, Franco said. His voice was steady, but his hands on the laptop had gone very still. But I did not authorize that payment. I would never. I know, Emma said. And she did. The transfers were too careful, too architecturally clever for someone who worked openly with the books every day. Someone who handled money professionally didn't hide it this way. They knew too well how the hiding left marks. This was done by someone who understands finance, but doesn't work in it day to day. Someone who had enough access to use the codes, but not enough familiarity with the records, to know that the Aldgate connection would show up in a cross-reference with council filings. Because they didn't expect anyone to cross-reference council filings with internal accounts, Dante said slowly. Those documents are kept completely separate, Adrian said. He had turned back from the window. The council filings are archived in the legal office. The internal accounts are here. Nobody routinely puts them side by side. Except someone who used to manage both, Emma said. She let that sit. Lucia made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Who managed both before Emma left? Dante asked. Emma, Adrian said. And my father. Your father is gone, Emma said. And I left 3 years ago. So whoever did this knew that the one person who'd worked across both systems was no longer in the building to notice. The silence that followed was the specific heavy silence of a room full of people who are all simultaneously doing the same arithmetic and not liking the result. I need the full personnel list, Emma said. Everyone who has touched authorization codes in the past 2 years. Everyone, regardless of seniority. Emma. Adrian's voice had a note in it she hadn't heard before. Not warning. Something that lived closer to concern. If whoever this is finds out we're looking. Then we move faster than they do, she said. Which means I need that list today, this morning. She closed the older notebook, kept the newer one open. And I need one more thing. What? I need to know exactly what Moretti is planning for Thursday's council meeting. Not rumors, not secondhand intelligence. What is he actually bringing to the table? Dante and Adrian exchanged a look. We have a source, Dante said carefully. But the information is costly to obtain, Adrian finished. Then it's a good thing you have someone in-house who can figure out what you need before you spend the cost obtaining it, Emma said. She stood, picked up both notebooks and looked at them. Send the personnel list to my room. I'm going to sleep for 3 hours. Wake me at 8. She paused at the door. And get me better coffee than last night. Whatever Gio made at 2 in the morning tasted like a compromise. She heard Dante almost laugh behind her. She didn't look back. She slept for exactly 3 hours. She woke at 8 to her phone ringing and a cup of coffee on the nightstand that was, she admitted, significantly better than a compromise. The list is outside your door, Dante said when she picked up. And we have a problem. She swung her legs off the bed. Define problem. Moretti called an emergency council session. Not Thursday, today, 2 o'clock. She was on her feet before he finished the sentence. What's the stated reason? Verification of the engagement. She stood very still. He wants proof, Dante continued. He's calling the whole council to convene and demanding that Adrian present his fiancée publicly, today, in front of everyone. Emma looked at the locked connecting door. He's moving fast, she said. He knows you're here. He found out this morning. We don't know how. Which meant the leak inside the organization was still active. Still feeding information. Whoever was passing data to Moretti hadn't been spooked by her arrival. They'd immediately weaponized it. Is Adrian aware? She asked. He's been on the phone for the past hour. He wants to talk to you before he responds to the council. She unlocked the connecting door and knocked twice. It opened in under 10 seconds. Adrian was dressed phone in hand and had the look of a man who had slept less than she had and handled it less gracefully. You heard? He asked. Yes. She stepped into the doorway, not fully into the room. What does presenting me to the council actually entail? A meeting. Formal, but not ceremonial. You sit with me. They'll ask questions. They'll look for weakness in you, in us, in the story. He paused. They will not be kind. I don't need them to be kind. I need to know what questions to expect. Victor will push hard. He'll try to make you contradict yourself or me. He'll look for inconsistencies in the timeline. Why I waited this long to announce. Why you haven't been seen with me publicly. And the honest answer is that I left 3 years ago and you didn't stop me. His expression flickered. Yes. So we don't use the honest answer. Emma. Not a lie, she said quickly. Just a different version of the truth. One that serves us better. She thought for a moment. I left because the environment after your father's illness began was becoming unsafe for someone in my position. I made the choice to distance myself until you had consolidated the transition. We maintained contact privately. When the council situation escalated, you asked me to come back. She looked at him. None of that is untrue. He stared at her. It's all true, she said. In the right order, selected carefully. Victor can push as hard as he wants. There's nothing in that version to break. You came up with that in 30 seconds. I came up with it in the car last night. I've been refining it since 2 in the morning. She turned back toward her room. I need 2 hours to look at the personnel list, and I need the right clothes. Whatever the equivalent of business armor is in your world. Tell Lucia. She already put something in your closet, he said. She did it at 6 this morning. Emma stopped. She was up at 6. She was up at 4. She went back to sleep at 5:30 and was up again at 6. A beat. She's been worried about this for longer than I have. Emma looked at the closet door, then back at Adrian. Your sister, she said, is one of the most competent people I have ever met. I know, he said. I mostly try to stay out of her way." It was such an unexpectedly honest thing to say that Emma almost smiled. She caught it. 2 hours. 2 hours, she said. Then we go. She spent those 2 hours with the personnel list and the notebooks, and what she found in the first 40 minutes made her set down her coffee carefully and sit very still for a moment. Two names appeared consistently across every touchpoint she'd mapped. Not in obvious ways, not flagged, not associated with any single transaction. But if you laid the authorization timestamps against the access logs, Franco had sent over these two names appeared in proximity to every relevant event. Not as authors, as witnesses. As the people who had been in the building logged into adjacent systems on the days the unusual transfers had been processed. One of them was a man named Petrov, a security consultant who had joined the organization 11 months ago. She didn't recognize the name from her time with the family, which meant he'd been brought in after she left. The other name was older, someone she recognized immediately. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she closed the notebook, put it in her bag, and got dressed. The clothes Lucia had chosen were exactly right, understated, and serious. The specific combination that said, "I don't need to impress you without being aggressive about it." Emma stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself and thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago and the woman she was now, and whether those two women were as different as she'd spent 3 years believing. She picked up her bag. She knocked on the connecting door. Adrian opened it. He looked at her. Something passed through his expression that was brief and unguarded and gone before she could name it. "Ready," he said. "Almost." She stepped into his room. "There's something I need to tell you before we go into that meeting. Something I found this morning." He went still. The particular stillness of someone who has learned that stillness is sometimes the only honest response to incoming information. "One of the two names connected to the financial pattern," she said. "I know him. He was with the family before I left." Adrian's eyes sharpened. "Who?" she told him. The expression on his face was not something she'd seen before. Not anger, it was past anger. It was the specific controlled devastation of a man who has just learned that a betrayal is not an abstract threat, but a specific person, a known face, a name that sat at his father's table. "Are you certain?" he asked. "I'm not certain of anything until I have more data," she said. "But the pattern is too specific to be coincidental. I need you to hear this before we walk into that room, because Victor is going to say things today. And some of those things might be designed to provoke a specific reaction from you. And I need you to not react." He looked at her. "Adrian." She held his gaze. "Whatever he says today, whatever he implies, whatever he claims to know, you look at him and you are calm, and you let me read the room. Can you do that?" A long pause. "Yes," he said. "If I touch your arm," she said, "it means I need you to stop talking. Whatever you're saying, stop. Can you do that too?" "Yes." She nodded. She turned toward the door. "Emma." His voice stopped her. She turned back. "The name you found," he said. "How long have you known it?" "Since 40 minutes ago." "And you came to tell me immediately?" "Yes." He held her gaze. "Why? You could have held that information, used it as leverage, made sure you had more data first." "Because you trusted me with access to those records," she said simply. "And I don't operate the way you do. I don't hold things back." She met his eyes. "Don't make me regret the difference." She walked out. He followed. The council meeting was held in the formal dining room. 12 men, 4 of whom Emma recognized, 8 of whom she assessed in the first 2 minutes of entering. She sat beside Adrian at the head of the table, her bag in her lap, her hands still, her face exactly as composed as it needed to be. Victor Moretti was exactly what she'd expected. Late 60s silver hair, the build of a man who had once been physically intimidating and now operated on the residual authority of that memory. He watched her enter with the specific evaluative gaze of someone who had been looking forward to this. "Ms. Callahan," he said before she'd even sat down, "we've heard a great deal about you." "I doubt that," she said pleasantly. "I've been very quiet for 3 years. A small ripple around the table. Not laughter. The adult equivalent, a slight shift in posture, a recalibration of initial assessment. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. Just slightly. Indeed, he said. Which raises the question of why Adrian chose not to introduce you to the council at any point during that time. He didn't need to, Emma said. Our personal relationship had no bearing on council business. And yet here you are. Here I am. She held his gaze. Times change. They do. Victor leaned forward. Tell me, Ms. Callahan, what exactly did you do for the Valenti family before your 3-year absence? She had known this question was coming. She'd had the answer ready since the morning. Financial oversight, she said. Records management. The kind of work that requires precision and discretion and absolutely no public profile. She smiled, thin and controlled. Which is exactly Mr. Moretti. He studied her. Some people, he said slowly, might find it concerning that a woman with that level of access simply walked away and walked back. Some people, she said, have never left a job and returned when circumstances changed. That seems like a limited life experience. Another ripple. This one closer to laughter. Victor's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. A sharpening. A reevaluation. She was not what he had planned for. He had prepared for someone nervous, or someone performing confidence badly, or someone who would reveal in the first 5 minutes that the engagement was a fabrication. He had not prepared for someone who looked at him like he was a problem she'd already partially solved. The council, he said, shifting angles, has concerns about the stability of the Valenti operation in the transitional period. Perhaps you'd care to address those concerns. I'd be happy to, she said. Specifically, he blinked. The concerns, she continued, tend to be about revenue, continuity, loyalty transition, and external pressure. I've spent the last several hours reviewing the financials of this operation. Revenue continuity is solid. Loyalty transition is a management question, not a structural one. And external pressure. She let a brief pause land. External pressure frequently has internal origins. I imagine the council is aware of that general principle. Victor Moretti looked at her for a very long time. And Emma Callahan looked back. And in the silence between them, in the weight of what was said and what was not said and what was coming, she felt something shift. Not in the room. In herself. Something she hadn't expected to feel in this building, in this world, in the presence of these men. She felt absolutely, precisely, completely in the right place. She reached under the table and very briefly touched Adrian's arm. He had been about to speak. He stopped. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Victor. Shall we continue? She said. The council meeting ended without resolution. That was Victor's move. Emma understood it the moment he called for a recess. He hadn't come to be convinced. He had come to assess her, and now he was retreating to recalibrate. The fact that she hadn't crumbled under his questioning wasn't a victory, it was an escalation. Victor Moretti was not a man who accepted being outmaneuvered gracefully. He was the kind of man who, when a door closed in his face, looked for the wall to walk through instead. She said as much to Adrian in the car on the way back. He's going to move before Thursday, she said. He didn't get what he wanted today. He'll try something different. Adrian was looking out the window. His profile was controlled, unreadable, the same face he'd worn through the entire meeting, calm, present, exactly as she'd asked. But she could feel the tension in the space between them, the specific charged quiet of someone holding something tightly in place. The name you gave me this morning, he said. I want to address it tonight. Not yet. He turned to look at her. Emma. Not yet, she repeated. If we move on that name before I've completed the financial picture, whoever it is disappears. Or worse, they warned Victor that we're on to the Aldgate connection, and he scrubs everything clean before we can use it. She held his gaze. I need 48 more hours. 48 hours, then you can do whatever you need to do. His jaw tightened. That person sat at my father's table. I know. He was at the funeral. I know Adrian. He looked me in the eye and told me he would protect this family. I know. She said it quietly, without softening it, because softening it wouldn't serve him. And that is exactly why we do this right. Not fast, right. Because when it's done, there can't be any question. There can't be any defense. You want a clean result, not a fast one. I was silent for a long moment. The car moved through streets she was starting to recognize again, the particular rhythm of this city at midday, the sounds of it, the specific geography of a world she'd tried to leave and kept finding herself inside. 48 hours, he said finally. Thank you. Don't thank me. Find me something I can use. She was already planning to. Back at the house, she went straight to the study. Franco was already there with his laptop, and the particular expression of a man who had been waiting to say something and choosing the moment carefully. I found something while you were at the meeting, he said. She set her bag down. Show me. He turned the laptop. The Aldgate account in Delaware. I went back further than your original window. I went back 4 years instead of 14 months. And there's a pattern in the early transactions that changes the picture significantly. She leaned forward and looked. The early Aldgate transactions from 4 years ago before the elder Valenti's death were larger, cleaner, moving through a different sub-account structure than the more recent careful transfers she'd mapped last night. And they were formatted differently. The authorization signatures on the early transactions were in a style she recognized. She had formatted documents that way herself, during the Providence acquisition, under specific instructions. She straightened slowly. These early transactions, she said carefully. Who originated them? I can't find an originator, Franco said. The records there are gaps. It looks like someone removed pages from the physical ledger and didn't account for the digital copies. He paused. The digital copies were stored in a secondary system that I don't think they knew existed. Emma looked at him. Who set up the secondary system? Franco met her eyes. You did. Before you left. She had forgotten about that. She had set up a backup archiving system during a period when the primary records had been compromised during a server migration. A quiet automatic system that copied every financial document to a separate encrypted folder on a server that, as far as she knew, nobody had ever found or known to look for, which meant 3 years of backup existed, including originals of documents that someone had subsequently tried to remove. Can you access the backups? She asked. Already did, Franco said. That's what I wanted to show you. He clicked to a new window. She read the originator on the earliest Aldgate transaction, and the room went very quiet inside her head. She had been wrong about one thing this morning. Not the second name that connection still held, but the first name. Petrov, the security consultant. He wasn't the originator. He was the conduit. The person who had recruited him, who had set up the early Aldgate structure, who had been doing this since before the elder Valenti died, that person was someone different, someone senior, someone who had been in the family for 20 years, someone who had until this moment been entirely above suspicion because he was the kind of person who other people used as a reference point for loyalty. She picked up her phone and called Dante. I need you to find Marco Valenti's current location, she said. And I need you to do it without telling Adrian. A pause on the other end. Marco's in Italy. Is he? Silence. Find him, she said. Now. She hung up. She stood over the laptop and looked at the originator's name for another 30 seconds. Then she pulled out the notebook and started writing. Not conclusions, not yet, but the shape of what she was seeing. The architecture of it. Because what she was looking at now was not a simple betrayal. It was a construction. Elaborate, patient years in the making. Someone had been quietly engineering a transfer of power long before the elder Valenti got sick. Long before anyone could have predicted the council would fracture. Long before Victor Moretti became the loudest voice in the room. Which meant Victor wasn't the architect. Victor was being used. She was still writing when Dante called back. 17 minutes had passed. Marco Valenti, Dante said, and his voice had the particular flatness of a man who has just confirmed something he deeply did not want to confirm. Arrived in Boston 2 days ago. He's been staying at a private residence in Brookline. The residence is registered to a holding company. He paused. The holding company's registered agent is Aldgate Advisory Group. Emma closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them and said, "Don't tell Adrian yet. Where is he right now?" "In the gym. He does that when he's—" "I know what he does," she said. "Keep him there. Tell him I need another hour with the records. Do not tell him anything else." "Emma." Dante's voice was careful. "What did you find?" "Something that changes everything," she said. "And I need to be sure before I say it out loud. Give me 1 hour." She used 53 minutes of it. She built the complete picture, not just the financial threads, but the timeline. The sequence of events that laid out properly told a story she hadn't wanted to see because it was so much larger and more calculated than a simple council power grab. Marco Valenti was Adrian's uncle, his father's younger brother. He had been by every external measure a loyal and peripheral figure based in Italy, largely removed from day-to-day operations, present only at significant family events and high-level meetings. She had met him 4 times during her years with the family. He had always been pleasant, quiet, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke and made you feel when he did speak that he'd been thinking carefully about what to say. She understood now exactly how carefully he'd been thinking. The structure was elegant. Marco had been slowly over the course of 4 years building a financial pipeline that connected Valenti assets to Moretti through Aldgate. Not to fund Moretti. To create the appearance of a connection that could be exposed at a strategic moment. A fabricated financial bridge that, if discovered by the council, would look like Adrian had been secretly dealing with Moretti, would look like a betrayal of the entire organization by the new head of the family less than a year into his leadership. It wasn't about Victor taking power. It was about Marco taking power, using Victor as the hammer. Victor probably didn't even know he was a tool, and the catalyst. The thing that would force the council to act was supposed to be a financial audit. Quested by Victor, triggered by whatever intelligence Victor had gathered about the Aldgate connection, which Marco had been feeding to him in careful pieces through Petrov, the security consultant Marco had placed inside the house 11 months ago. The audit would reveal the Aldgate pipeline. Adrian would be unable to explain it. The council would remove him, and Marco, the loyal uncle, the elder statesman, would step in to stabilize the family. She sat back. She picked up her coffee. It was cold. She drank it anyway. Then she stood up, picked up both notebooks, put them in her bag, and went to find Adrian. He was in the kitchen. Not the gym. Dante had evidently misread the situation. He was sitting at the counter with a glass of water and the look of a man who had been thinking very hard for a long time and had arrived somewhere uncomfortable. He looked up when she walked in. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. She set the older notebook on the counter between them, opened it to the page she'd marked, turned it to face him. He looked at it. She watched his face. She had prepared herself for anger. For the specific volcanic quality of Adrian Valenti's anger, which she had seen twice in the years she'd worked for the family, and which moved through a room like weather. She had prepared herself for denial, for the human instinct to push back against information that rearranged everything. She had not prepared herself for what actually happened. He read the page. Then the next one. He read slowly and thoroughly, which she recognized as his method. He never skimmed anything that mattered. When he finished, he set the notebook down with the deliberate care of someone who is being very intentional about every physical movement. And then he sat completely still. "Marco," he said. "Just the name. Just one word." "Yes," she said. "He was at my father's bedside," Adrian said. "When my father died, he was in the room." She didn't say anything. "He gave the eulogy," Adrian continued in the same low, eerily even voice. "He stood in front of 300 people and talked about loyalty, about what the family meant, about my father's vision." A pause. "I asked him to do it, because I thought he understood what we were." "Adrian." "How long?" he asked. "How long has he been building this?" "The earliest transaction I can definitively connect to him is 4 years ago," she said. "Before your father's illness was diagnosed." Something moved through his face at that. "He knew," Adrian said. "Or he suspected. He started building his exit route before anyone else knew there would need to be one. That's what the timeline suggests. He stood up. She watched him cross to the other side of the kitchen and stand there with his hands on the counter and his back to her. The line of his shoulders was controlled. Everything was controlled. That was what frightened her slightly, not the anger she'd braced for, but this. The absolute consuming stillness of a man whose entire architecture of trust had just been restructured around a void. "Adrian," she kept her voice even. "I need you to hear me." He didn't turn around. "What you want to do right now," she said, "is go find him. I know that, and I understand it. But if you confront Marco directly, he disappears. He has resources we haven't fully mapped, contacts we don't know about, and a head start of 4 years on this plan. If he runs, we lose the evidence trail, and we lose the ability to expose this to the council cleanly." She paused. "Victor needs to understand he's been used. The council needs to see the full picture. If we do this right, Marco doesn't just lose, he has nowhere to go." Adrian turned around. His eyes were dark and absolutely steady. "You have a plan," he said. "I have the beginning of one. Tell me." She took a breath. "The council is expecting an audit. Victor is going to request one probably at Thursday's meeting, using the Aldgate connection as his justification. He thinks that audit will expose you. We let it happen." Adrian stared at her. "We let it happen. We let Victor request the audit. We agree to it. We volunteer for it even. We appear completely confident." She leaned forward. "Because by the time the audit team sits down, we will have already documented the full Aldgate trail, not the version that implicates you, but the real version. The one that leads directly to Marco. The one that shows every transaction, every authorization, every piece of the structure he built with his fingerprints on all of it. And the backup system," Adrian said slowly. "The secondary archive you set up. Provides originals of documents that someone went to considerable trouble to remove from the primary record," she confirmed. "Including the earliest transactions which are in Marco's name. Not yours, not a forgery, his actual authorization signature." She held his gaze. "He didn't know the backups existed, because he researched your records after I left, and I wasn't here to tell him." The silence stretched between them. "If this works," Adrian said, "the council sees that Marco was engineering a coup, using Victor as cover. And Victor learns he was a pawn," Emma said, "which is its own kind of consequence. A man like Victor doesn't forgive being used." Adrian was quiet for a moment, processing. Then Dante walked in. His face said something had happened before his mouth did. "We have a problem," he said. "Petrov is gone. His room is cleared out. He left sometime in the last 2 hours." Adrian looked at Emma. "Marco knows we're looking," she said. "He's moving the timeline up." "How?" Adrian asked. "Who told him?" "Someone still in the house," Dante said. His voice was grim. "Has to be." Emma was already on her feet. "Then we move tonight. Not Thursday. Tonight." She was reaching for her phone, her bag, the notebooks. "Dante, I need you to get me a direct line to Sal Carvana. Not through the council channels, his personal number." Dante blinked. "Carvana, why?" "Because Lucia said Carvana follows whoever talks loudest," she said. "And right now, nobody's talking to him directly. That's an opening." She looked at Adrian. "You said Carvana was loyal to your father personally, not to the organization, to the man." "Yes. Then he'll respond to evidence. Real evidence. Not council politics, not alliances, not which way the financial wind is blowing. If I put the full picture in front of him. Marco's plan. Victor's role, all of it. He won't follow Victor into a coup. He'll see the coup for what it is." "You want to go around the council," Adrian said. "I want to build a majority before the council sits down," she said. "So that when Victor requests the audit Thursday, he looks up and realizes he doesn't have the votes he thought he had." Adrian looked at her for a long, measuring moment. "Carvana hates phone calls," he said. "He'll want to meet in person." "Then we meet in person." "Tonight?" "He's in the city." "Yes. He keeps an apartment on Newberry." "Then yes. Tonight. She met his eyes. Can you get him to agree to a meeting in the next 2 hours? If I tell him I have evidence of a threat to the council's stability, yes. He pulled out his phone. He'll want to know what kind of evidence. Tell him it involves a family member, she said. And financial records. That should be enough. He nodded. He stepped out of the kitchen to make the call. Dante looked at her. You've done this before, he said. Not a question. Not the mafia part, the strategy part, the moving pieces around. I managed financial records, she said. Records tell you where the bodies are buried, figuratively. She picked up her bag. Usually figuratively. He almost smiled. He was getting better at that. Lucia appeared in the doorway. She had clearly been listening from the hall, which Emma had assumed. Lucia didn't lurk. She positioned herself strategically, which was a meaningful distinction. I want to come tonight, Lucia said. No, Adrian said, reappearing from the hallway. Carvana agreed to meet. But Lucia, you're not. Carvana knew our mother, Lucia said simply. He has 3 daughters. He responds to women in ways he doesn't respond to men, not because he underestimates them, because he trusts them more. She looked at Emma. Tell him I'm wrong. Emma looked at her. She's not wrong, Emma said. Adrian pressed his eyes closed briefly. Fine. But you say what we agree you say, and nothing else. Obviously, Lucia said with the tone of someone for whom this went without saying. They left 40 minutes later, Adrian, Emma, Lucia, and Dante. No additional security. Carvana had asked for small. That was either a good sign or the beginning of a problem, and Emma spent the drive determining which. By the time they arrived, she had decided it was good. A man setting a trap didn't ask for small. Small meant he was being careful about who saw this meeting happening. Small meant he already had doubts about the council situation and didn't want to be seen exploring them. How was waiting for them in a private room above a restaurant he owned, or was listed as owning, which was a distinction. Emma noted a thin, precise man in his early 70s, with the watchful eyes of someone who had survived multiple transitions of power by always knowing slightly more than the people around him. He looked at Adrian, then at Lucia, then for a long moment at Emma. You're the Callahan woman, he said. Yes, she said. Marco mentioned you once. He said you were too observant for your own good. Emma set her bag on the table and sat down. He was right, she said. It turned out to be very good for my purposes and very bad for his. She opened the notebook. She talked for 22 minutes without stopping. She walked Carvana through every transaction, every timeline, every piece of the architecture Marco had built. She showed him the backup documents photographs Franco had taken of the screen printed at the house before they left. She showed him Petrov's placement inside the Valenti household 11 months ago. She showed him the Aldgate connection and exactly where it led. Carvana didn't interrupt. When she finished, the room was quiet. He looked at the documents for a long moment. Then he looked at Adrian. Your uncle built this for 4 years, he said. Yes, Adrian said, while your father was dying. Yes. Carvana was quiet. His expression moved through several things that were difficult to read, and then settled into something that was not sympathy exactly, but close enough to matter. I don't follow coups, he said finally. I never have. It's a principle, not a loyalty. Coups are bad for business. They create instability that benefits nobody except the man at the center of them. He looked at the documents one more time. Then at Emma. You built this picture from financial records. Yes, she said. In how long? About 18 hours. He looked at Adrian. Keep her, he said bluntly. Adrian said nothing. Thursday, Carvana said, standing. I'll be there, and I'll bring DeLuca with me. He named a 4th family head, one Emma recognized as aligned with Carvana on principle. Victor can request his audit. We'll see how it looks when the full picture is on the table. He paused at the door. The uncle. Where is he now? Boston, Adrian said. We're managing the timeline. Don't manage it too long, Carvana said. A man who's been planning for 4 years has contingencies. He left. The room was quiet for a moment after the door closed. Then Adrian looked at Emma. She was looking at the documents still spread across the table, the careful handwriting in her notebook. The shape of a trap that had been built for years and that she had in 18 hours managed to map completely. She was thinking about Marco. Not with anger exactly, with something closer to a tired, clear-eyed understanding of how this always worked. How the people who hurt you most were always the ones you'd trusted to know you well enough not to. "You okay?" Lucia said quietly from across the table. Emma looked at her. "Yes." "You went somewhere for a second." "I was thinking about contingencies," Emma said. She started gathering the documents. "Carvana was right. Marco has them. Which means by tomorrow morning he'll know the meeting happened. He'll know we've talked to Carvana." She looked at Adrian. "When he knows that, what does he do?" Adrian's voice was flat. "He panics. And a panicking man with 4 years of planning and a head start goes to his failsafe," Dante said from the doorway where he'd been standing. "Whatever the final version of his plan is, the nuclear option." Emma nodded. She had been thinking about this since the kitchen, since she first understood what she was looking at. "There's something I haven't found yet," she said. "Something in the structure that I'm missing. Marco is careful. Everything he's built has a redundancy. There's a layer I haven't mapped." "How do we find it?" Lucia asked. Emma zipped her bag. "We go back through the records," she said. "All night if we need to." She looked at Adrian. "And you're going to tell me everything you know about your uncle. Every conversation, every visit, every offhand comment he made in the last 4 years. Because somewhere in there, he told you exactly what he was planning." Adrian looked at her. "He won't have meant to," she said. "He'll have been too careful to think he revealed anything. But careful people always leave one thread. One thing they were too close to see." She held his gaze. "Tell me everything. We'll find it." He nodded. They left the restaurant and stepped back into the Boston night, and Emma walked beside Adrian with the documents in her bag and the shape of an incomplete picture still working through the back of her mind. Around them, the city moved traffic voices, the ordinary machinery of ordinary lives, and she thought about the fact that she had been in this house for less than 48 hours and had already rebuilt a world she'd spent 3 years dismantling. She thought about what that meant. She told herself it didn't mean anything except that she was good at her job. She almost believed it. The car was waiting. She reached for the door handle. Adrian's hand briefly covered hers, not stopping her. Just there. A moment of contact that lasted exactly long enough to be intentional and ended before she could respond to it. She got in the car. She opened her notebook. She started looking for the thread she was missing. She found the thread at 4:17 in the morning, not in the financial records, not in the Aldgate documents, or the backup archive, or the authorization logs. Franco had pulled. She found it in a conversation, a memory specifically, that Adrian had been talking through for the past 3 hours while she listened and wrote, and occasionally asked him to back up and repeat something in more detail. He had been telling her about a dinner. 14 months ago. Marco had come to Boston for what he said was a family visit. His first since the elder Valenti's funeral, which everyone had accepted at face value, because grief has its own timeline, and nobody questions a man who takes a year to want to sit at his dead brother's table again. They had eaten in the formal dining room. Adrian, Lucia, Marco, and 2 of the senior family members. After dinner, Marco had walked through the house. He said he wanted to remember it. He said being here made him feel close to his brother. He had stopped in the study for nearly 40 minutes while Adrian handled a call. What was in the study at that point? Emma asked. Adrian thought. The usuals, files, the main operational ledger for the quarter. My father's personal papers, I hadn't finished going through them. Emma set her pen down. Your father's personal papers, she said slowly. Yes, I'd been meaning to sort through them for months. They were still in the boxes from the hospital. Adrian. She looked at him across the desk. Did Marco know your father kept personal records separate from the operational files? Adrian went very still. Everyone knew, he said quietly. My father was meticulous. He kept a personal ledger, names, agreements, favors owed, favors given. 40 years of it. He called it his memory. He paused. He told me once that the personal ledger was worth more than everything else in this house combined. Where is it now? Silence. Adrian stood up so fast his chair moved back 2 feet. The boxes, he said. I put them in the archive room after I finally went through them, 6 months ago. He was already moving toward the door. I went through everything. Letters, documents, photographs. I didn't find a ledger. Because it wasn't there, Emma said, following him into the hallway. Marco took it. During the dinner. During the 40 minutes you were on a call and he was alone in the study. She kept pace beside him. Think about what's in that ledger, Adrian. 40 years of agreements. Favors owed to your family by people in positions of power. Politicians, judges, law enforcement, business leaders. Names that would be catastrophically damaging if they became public. He stopped walking. She watched it land. That's his fail-safe, she said. He doesn't need the Aldgate structure anymore. If we expose him Thursday, if the council turns against him, if everything falls apart, he releases the ledger. Not to law enforcement, to the press. Or he threatens to. And suddenly every person who owes this family a debt becomes desperate to distance themselves, which means every protection this family has had for 40 years evaporates overnight. Adrian's voice came out very quiet. He would burn everything, to save himself. Yes. She held his gaze. He doesn't want to run the family anymore. He just doesn't want to go to prison. The ledger is his insurance policy. His guarantee that no matter what happens Thursday, you can't let him fall too hard. Because if he falls, Adrian said, he takes 40 years of this family's agreements with him. Yes. He turned and kept walking. Faster now. She matched his pace. Dante, he said loud enough to carry down the hallway. Dante appeared from somewhere where she was beginning to understand he was always somewhere nearby, operating on a proximity that looked casual and wasn't. I need Marco's location confirmed right now. Current location. Not the Brookline address where he physically is at this moment. Dante had his phone out before Adrian finished the sentence. They went back to the study. Emma sat and opened the notebook again, not because she needed to write anything new, but because the physical act of holding a pen helped her think. Always had the small specific pressure of it against her fingers was the tactile equivalent of organizing. She thought about the ledger. She thought about 40 years of names. She thought about what it meant that Marco had walked out of that study with it tucked under his arm, probably inside a jacket, and nobody had noticed. Nobody had even thought to look. Because he was family. Because he was grief and history and the face of loyalty. Because the best camouflage in this world she had learned long ago was the appearance of belonging completely. Dante reappeared in the doorway. Marco is at Logan, private terminal. There's a flight scheduled for 6:22 a.m. wheels up in less than 2 hours. Emma looked at the clock on the wall. 4:41. He knows, she said. He found out about the Carvana meeting faster than we expected. He's running. If he gets on that plane with the ledger, Dante started. He doesn't disappear, Adrian said. He gains leverage from a distance which is worse. He looked at Emma. Options. She was already thinking. We can't intercept him at the airport physically. That's a scene it involves law enforcement. It creates exactly the kind of exposure you can't walk back. She turned the pen over in her fingers once. We need him to choose not to get on the plane. How do you make a man in that position choose to stay? Dante asked. You give him something worth more than the insurance policy, she said. You give him a reason to believe that running achieves less than whatever deal you're offering. She looked at Adrian. Can you reach him directly right now? Yes. Call him, she said. Don't threaten. Don't tell him what we know. Just tell him you need to speak with him before Thursday. Tell him you have questions about the family records, your father's papers. That you found something that concerned you, and you want his guidance before the council meeting. Adrian stared at her. You want me to pretend I don't know? I want you to make him curious enough to hesitate, she said. A man who spent 4 years being the most informed person in the room doesn't walk away from a call like that without wondering what you found, what you know, whether there's something he missed. She held his gaze steadily. Buy us 30 minutes, that's all I need. What do you do in 30 minutes? I make a phone call of my own. He looked at her for one long moment. Then he picked up his phone and stepped out of the study. Emma looked at Dante. I need the name of the best forensic accountant you have access to. Someone completely outside the family structure. Dante's eyebrows rose slightly. At 4:45 in the morning. Is there one or not? There's a woman in Cambridge, Rita Chen. She does work for 3 of the major law firms in the city. She's thorough. Call her. Tell her I need 30 minutes of her time right now by phone, and that she'll be compensated for the inconvenience at double her standard rate. Tell her it's regarding a document authentication question. He called. Rita Chen, her credit picked up on the 4th ring, sounded annoyed for approximately 15 seconds, and then became very focused very quickly when Emma outlined what she needed. What Emma needed was specific. She needed to know whether a financial ledger of the type she was describing, handwritten 40 years of entries maintained by a single author, would constitute admissible evidence in a civil proceeding if it could be authenticated by a forensic document examiner. And she needed to know whether a photographic copy properly timestamped and authenticated carried the same legal weight as the physical document. If the original can be established as genuine, and the photographs are authenticated as accurate reproductions. Yes, Rita Chen said crisply. Why? Because, Emma said, I believe the original is about to leave the country, and I need to know whether we need the physical document, or whether something else will serve the same purpose. A pause. What kind of something else? The person who has the original has been in contact with parties who have reason to want its contents disclosed, Emma said carefully. If those communications were documented, then the communications themselves establish the existence and significance of the document, Rita said, which combined with corroborating financial records could be sufficient depending on the jurisdiction and the nature of the proceeding. Another pause. Are you the Emma Callahan who published that piece on shell entity structures in the Harvard Business Review 7 years ago? Emma blinked. Yes, I read it 3 times, Rita said. It was excellent. Call me when you have the physical evidence question sorted. I'll clear my morning. She hung up. Emma held the phone for a moment, slightly disoriented by the entire exchange, then set it down and looked up. Adrian was standing in the doorway. He's not getting on the plane, he said. She exhaled. He hesitated. He asked me what I found in the papers. Adrian's voice was flat. He couldn't help himself. He wants to know what I know. He crossed to the desk. He's coming here. He wants to meet before the council session. Emma thought about that. He's going to try to read you, she said. Figure out how much you know and whether he can still manage it. He's not surrendering. He's reconnoitering. I know, which means when he walks through that door, everything depends on what he sees in your face. Adrian looked at her directly. Then tell me what my face should show him. She thought about it. Confusion, she said. Genuine, specific confusion. The face of a man who found something in his father's papers that he can't reconcile, that doesn't make sense, and that he's hoping his uncle can explain. Not accusation, not knowledge, confusion. You want me to perform for him. I want you to give him enough rope, she said. When he sees confusion instead of accusation, he's going to make a calculation. He's going to decide he has time to manage this. And when a man decides he has time, he stops being careful. Adrian was quiet for a moment. She watched him absorb it, turn it over, check it from different angles, the way he did with everything that mattered. And while he's not being careful, he said slowly, he'll tell me what I still don't know, Emma said. Not intentionally, but he will. Marco Valenti arrived at 6:15. Emma had positioned herself deliberately, not at the desk, not in the center of the room, but in the chair in the corner with the notebooks closed and her hands loose in her lap. The specific posture of someone who is present but secondary. Someone who belongs in the room but is not its focus. She had learned this 2 years ago. How to be in a room without being its center. How to make yourself the furniture so that the people with things to hide forgot to hide them from you. Marco came in with the specific calibrated ease of a man who has spent decades knowing how to walk into difficult rooms. He was 63, lean silver-haired, with the same dark eyes as the rest of the Valenti family. and a warmth in his expression that Emma now read as precisely engineered. He embraced Adrian briefly. He kissed Lucia on the cheek, Lucia, who had been briefed and who maintained a composure that Emma privately found extraordinary. He glanced at Dante, nodded once, and then his eyes moved to Emma, with exactly the kind of mild, politely curious assessment that said he had been expecting her and had decided how to handle her. "Emma Callahan," he said. "Adrian told me you'd come back." "Marco," she said pleasantly. "It's good to see you." He looked at her for exactly 1 second too long. She smiled. He sat down. Adrian placed the folder on the table between them. A folder Emma had prepared, which contained real documents from the father's papers. Legitimate correspondence that raised a genuine question about a property transaction in Providence from 8 years ago. Real benign, selected precisely because it was the kind of thing that would reasonably confuse someone who didn't have full context. "I found this going through Dad's correspondence," Adrian said. His voice was right. Exactly what she'd asked for. Genuinely uncertain, slightly troubled, carrying the specific weight of a son, still moving through the unfinished business of a parent's death. "There are references here to an agreement with a firm called Aldgate. I've never heard of it. Franco can't find it in the operational records. I was hoping you might know what it was. You were closer to the early Providence deals than I was." Marco picked up the folder. Emma watched his hands. They were very steady. He was good. Very good. "Aldgate," he said thoughtfully. "Yes, I think I remember this. This would have been part of the early acquisition structure. Your father used several different routing vehicles to separate the real estate transactions from the operational accounts. Standard practice." He looked up. "Is there a specific concern?" "The firm appears in some other documents I found," Adrian said. "More recently." A pause. A fraction of a second, but Emma caught it. "More recently," Marco repeated. "In some council filings," Adrian said. "I'm probably misreading it. The council filings there's a lot of material, and I'm not as fluent in the technical side as I should be." He looked at Marco with the specific, genuine vulnerability of a man asking his elder for guidance. It was, Emma thought, the most precise piece of acting she'd ever watched. "I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something before Thursday." Marco set the folder down. He looked at his nephew. Then he looked at Emma. And Emma saw at the exact moment he made his calculation. The moment he decided that Adrian's confusion was real, that the question was limited to this folder, that he still had room to manage the situation. He smiled. "You're not missing anything," he said. "Aldgate was dissolved years ago. If it's appearing in council filings, it's residual old documents referenced in new submissions. It happens with legacy structures." He reached over and patted Adrian's arm. "Don't worry about it. Focus on Thursday. You have enough to handle." "Thank you," Adrian said. "Of course." Marco glanced at his watch. "I should get settled before the council session. We can talk more afterward." He stood. "Emma." He looked at her with the same mild warmth. "It's good that you're back. Adrian needs people around him who he trusts." "He needs people who tell him the truth," she said pleasantly. Something passed through Marco's eyes. "Yes," he said. "He does." He left the room. The door closed. Dante was on his phone in under 3 seconds. "He's going to the guest suite. I have 2 people on him." He looked at Emma. "How much did you get?" "Enough," she said. She opened the notebook. He confirmed Aldgate was a routing vehicle used for the Providence acquisition. Voluntarily. Without being asked specifically enough to require that answer. She wrote it down. That's on record now, him explaining the structure in his own words in front of witnesses. When the council sees the documents and the trail, and hears that he provided an explanation that matches the fraudulent structure exactly, they'll know he understood what he was looking at. "He didn't think he was incriminating himself," Lucia said quietly from the doorway. "No," Emma said. "He thought he was explaining away a minor concern. He didn't know I was listening for something different." "The ledger," Adrian said. "He still has it." "Yes." She looked at him. "We're not getting it back before Thursday. But we don't need it before Thursday. We need it back eventually for your family's protection, not for the council proceeding. The council proceeding we can handle with what we have." She paused. After Thursday, when Marco has no leverage left with the council, we negotiate the ledger separately, one thing at a time. Adrian looked at her. You've already planned what comes after Thursday, he said. I've planned through the weekend, she said. Ask me what comes after that, and I'll tell you I'm still working on it. He almost smiled. Almost. The council meeting on Thursday was the most precisely choreographed proceeding Emma had ever sat through, and she had sat through a great many. Victor Moretti arrived with the confidence of a man who had prepared his attack thoroughly and expected it to land cleanly. He was formally dressed, accompanied by his two senior advisors, and he opened with the requested audit motion before anyone else had finished settling into their seats. He cited the Aldgate connection. He spoke about financial irregularities, about concerns regarding the transition of leadership, about the council's responsibility to ensure the stability of the organization. He spoke for 6 minutes. Then Adrian set the full documentation on the table. Not just the Aldgate records. Everything. The complete picture Emma had built across 72 hours, the 4-year structure, the Petrov placement, the deleted documents and their backup copies, the timeline connecting every transaction to Marco's authorization, and the meeting record from the Brookline address with its Aldgate registered holding company. And then Emma spoke. She addressed the council for 12 minutes. Not emotionally, not dramatically. With the specific, precise clarity of someone who has spent her career making complicated financial architecture, legible to people who need to understand it without necessarily being fluent in it. She walked them through it the way you walk someone through a map. Here is where you are. Here is where you've been taken. Here is the road that was built for you without your knowledge, and here is where it was going to lead. The room was completely silent when she finished. Victor Moretti looked at the documents in front of him. He looked at them for a very long time. When he looked up, his face had changed. The confidence was gone, not replaced by collapse, because Victor Moretti was not a man who collapsed. But something had drained out of it. The specific, settled authority of a man who had been certain he was the one moving the pieces. I was not aware of this, he said. His voice was flat, even. Precise in the way that meant he was choosing every word with extraordinary care. The Aldgate connection that was brought to my attention, it was framed as evidence of Adrian's dealings. I was not told it was constructed. We know, Emma said. We're not suggesting you knew. He looked at her. Something shifted behind his eyes, a recalibration, the same one she'd seen in the first council meeting, but more complete this time. The source, he said carefully. The source who brought this to my attention is sitting in the guest suite of this house as we speak, Adrian said quietly. Victor was silent for a moment. I don't follow coups, Sal Carvana said from the other end of the table almost casually. I believe I've mentioned this. A ripple of something moved through the room. Not laughter. Something adjacent to it, the collective exhale of men who had been waiting to know which way this was going and had just been told. Victor looked at Adrian. The audit, he said. Conduct it, Adrian said. We'll cooperate fully. Every record, every account, every transaction for the past 4 years. He paused. The audit will confirm what's in that documentation. Victor nodded slowly. Once. It was not surrender. It was a man of intelligence and experience recognizing that a particular battle was over and that there were other calculations to make. The matter of Marco Valenti, he said. Is a family matter, Adrian said. That will be handled through family process. The council need not be involved in the specifics. Another pause. Victor looked at Emma one more time. She held his gaze. There was something in his expression she hadn't expected, not hostility. Something more complicated than that. You did this in 72 hours, he said. I had good records to work with, she said. He stood. He gathered his documents. He looked at the room. I'll expect the audit materials within the week. Carvana, you can coordinate with my office on the examining team. He nodded at Adrian, a minimal nod, formal. The acknowledgement of one man to another that a round has concluded. We'll speak after the audit. He left. The room let out a collective breath. Marco was brought into the room 20 minutes later between two of Dante's people, and he walked in with the dignity of a man who had already run the numbers and understood them. He looked at the table, at the documents, at Adrian. He sat down. "I'd like to speak with my nephew alone," he said. Emma began gathering her things. "No," Adrian said. Marco looked at him. "Emma stays," Adrian said, "and Lucia. Everyone else can go." He waited until the room had emptied to the four of them. Then he looked at his uncle. "Tell me why." Marco was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady. Old. Carrying something that might have been the closest he could come to remorse. "Your father," he said, "was not a well man long before anyone admitted it. I saw it 4 years ago, the decisions he was making, the agreements, the alliances, he was losing his edge. And I watched the family I had given my entire life to begin to drift." He looked at his hands. "I did not trust you to hold it." "So you decided to take it," Adrian said. "I decided to preserve it." "By destroying me." Marco met his eyes. "By replacing you with someone who had 40 years of experience." A pause. "I was wrong about what it would cost." The silence was long. "The ledger," Adrian said. Marco reached into his jacket and set it on the table. A worn leather book, dark with age, the kind of object that looked simultaneously ordinary and irreplaceable. Emma looked at it, then at Adrian. He looked at it for a long moment. He didn't reach for it. "You came here tonight," he said to Marco, knowing it was over. "You came anyway." "I have no interest in running," Marco said. "I'm 63 years old. I'm tired." He looked at his nephew steadily. "And whatever I did, I built this family with my hands. I won't watch it end from somewhere in Europe." Adrian said nothing for a long time. "You'll go back to Italy," he said finally. "Permanently. Your assets remain intact. Your name remains attached to the family. You attend no council functions. You make no contact with Victor Moretti or anyone associated with his organization. You are retired. Completely and finally." Marco nodded. "And if you surface in anything," Adrian continued, "anything at all, the full documentation goes to every law enforcement agency that would be interested in it. Federal and otherwise." "Understood," Marco said. He stood. He looked at Lucia. Something passed between them that was old and sad and entirely beyond words. Then he looked at Emma. "He was right about you," he said. "When he told me you were back, I thought it was a mistake, that you were a weakness." He paused. "I underestimated what it means to have someone in your corner who isn't afraid of the truth." He left. The room was quiet. Lucia picked up the ledger, looked at it for a moment, and set it in front of Adrian. "I'm going to sleep," she said, "for a very long time." She kissed the top of her brother's head, a quick, fierce press of her lips to his hair, entirely unself-conscious. Then she looked at Emma. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it." She walked out. Emma sat across from Adrian in the empty room. He was looking at the ledger. She gave him the silence. She had learned over the past 72 hours that he needed silence the way other people needed conversation to process, to integrate, to let the shape of something settle into him before he could speak about it accurately. When he finally looked up, his eyes were clear. "It's over," he said. "The Marco part," she said. "Yes." He almost smiled at that. "The Victor part will take longer. Months," she agreed. "The audit, the relationship, rebuilding the council dynamics. It's not nothing." "No." He looked at her. "But the foundation is stable now. For the first time since my father died, it's actually stable." He paused. "Because of you." She looked at him steadily. "Because of the backup archive I set up 3 years ago, without knowing I'd ever need it." "Because you set it up," he said. "Because you're the kind of person who builds redundancies into everything. Who sees the thing nobody else is looking for. Who walks back into a world she spent 3 years escaping because—" He stopped, started again. "Why, Emma, the real reason? Not the calculation about Victor knowing your name. Why did you actually come back?" She held his gaze. She had been asking herself this question since the first night. In the car. At the kitchen counter eating leftover pasta. At 4 in the morning with 2 notebooks open and the shape of a betrayal assembling itself under her hands. "Because when you sat down in that chair at the restaurant," she said slowly, "and I told you to get out and you didn't." She paused. I was angry. I was genuinely completely angry. But underneath it the thing I actually felt was... She stopped, looked at her hands, then back at him. Relief. I felt relief. And I didn't want to feel that. I spent 3 years making sure I wouldn't feel that. And then you sat down anyway, and it was just there. He was very still. "That frightened me more than Victor," she said. "More than any of it." "Emma, I'm not finished." She kept her voice steady. "I came back because I calculated that it was safer. I told myself that was the whole reason. And it wasn't." She looked at him. "I don't know what that means yet. I'm not ready to know what it means yet. But I'm not going to pretend it doesn't exist because I told you at the beginning that I don't hold things back. So, that's the truth." Adrian looked at her across the table. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the restaurant, like she was the only person in the room. Like the room had been built around her being in it. "The 6 months," he said. "Yes." "Does the 6 months still apply?" She thought about it honestly. The way she thought about everything, turning it, checking its weight, being precise about what it actually was. "I don't know," she said. "Ask me in 6 months." He nodded, slowly, with the specific care of a man who understood he was being given something that required patience to hold correctly. "All right," he said. She stood and picked up her notebooks. "Adrian." She paused at the door. "The document I signed. The amendments I made in the margins." "Yes." "I need you to have the revised version redrawn cleanly and signed by both of us." She met his eyes. "With witnesses." He looked at her for a moment. "Because you don't operate the way I do," he said. "Because I don't hold things back," she said. "And I need everything between us to be clear." She walked into the hallway. Outside, the city was waking up the specific sounds of early morning. The shift between the night world and the day world. The long exhale of a place that had been awake all night, becoming something different. She stood for a moment and just listened. She thought about the bookshop, about the small apartment, the French press, the yellow tulip Daniel had brought her, that was probably still sitting in water on her kitchen table. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, running from a world that had gotten too close to her heart, and the woman she was right now, standing in the hallway of that same world, having just spent 72 hours dismantling a 4-year conspiracy with 2 notebooks and a backup archive she'd built half by accident. She thought about relief. She picked up her phone and called Lucia. "The document needs to be redrawn," she said when Lucia answered alert despite the hour. "Clean copy. Both signatures witnessed." "I already called the lawyer," Lucia said. "He'll be here at 9. Emma almost laughed. "You were listening." "I was in the hallway," Lucia said without apology. 9 o'clock. Sleep until 8. She hung up. Emma stood for one more moment in the quiet hallway of the Valenti house, in the life she had returned to, with open eyes and a clear head, and something in her chest that she was not ready to name yet, but intended to treat with the same precision she brought to everything that mattered. Then she went upstairs. She did not lock the connecting door. She did not unlock it either. She left it exactly as it was closed, latched neither invitation nor barrier, and lay down in the dark and let the past 72 hours settle through her, all of it. The anger and the calculation and the relief she hadn't wanted to feel, and the truth she'd told anyway. She was still Emma Callahan. She still had a bookshop and a French press, and a life she had built with her own hands from the pieces of a person she'd decided to become. And she was also the woman who had walked into a Mafia council meeting and changed the outcome with 2 notebooks and 40 years of someone else's records and the absolute unshakable willingness to see things clearly. Both of those things were true. Both of those women were her. And for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel the need to choose between them. Because the most dangerous thing Emma Callahan had ever done was not walking back into Adrian Valenti's world. It was deciding finally and without apology to stop being afraid of her own.